We're back live with you tonight on In Focus. Thanks for staying on. Mmusi Maimane's political journey appears to be far from over. He's launched a new political party, Build One South Africa, ahead of the 2024 general elections. Newzroom Afrika's Nick Anderson takes a look back at Maimane's political journey so far.
Mmusi Maimane quoted Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Terminator films during the launch of his new political party on Saturday. The message was clear. He's back. Maimane is now one of the most well-known non-ANC members in SA politics. But will South Africans decide to turn to him again at the ballot box? This time with a different party. Build One South Africa is the name of his new political party, or BOSA for short. Maimane launched the party in Naledi, Soweto, and with the party's logo a star, he's vowed to make plenty more of those ahead of the country's next general election in 2024.
I come from a generation of South Africans who know what happened to battle against corruption, to battle against racism, to battle against extremism. I have known both defeat and I have known triumph. But I want to tell you, I still remain in the arena.
The usual political promises were also made. From housing to education and jobs, Maimane insisted that the way to growth is to invigorate the township economy.
The dream that I hold for this country is a dream upon which not only is our education improving, but we have an economy that will put a job in every home. I want to put a job in every home in this country.
The new BOSA leader insists that his party will quickly make inroads in all 9 provinces across the country. But will Maimane's previous politics hurt or hinder him? Let's take a look back now. In 2010, Maimane started becoming known to the public when he was named the DA candidate for the mayoral position in the city of Johannesburg. After 5 years of building his name in the party, Maimane was elected DA leader. After the return of Helen Zille to party leadership, Maimane called it quits from all things DA in 2019, describing the party as not the vehicle to take the country forward. 2 years ago, Maimane turned his focus to helping independent political candidates by launching his One South Africa movement. The launch of BOSA this week comes after Maimane accused Parliament of blocking efforts for successful electoral reform that would benefit independent candidates. Maimane says a key goal of his BOSA movement will be to focus on delivering the best cabinet that South Africa has ever seen. Combating crime and corruption, Maimane says that with time, South Africans will see that his latest political offering is far more than just words. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Nick Anderson in Johannesburg.
All right, for more on this, we're joined now by Build One South Africa leader, Mmusi Maimane. Good evening, and thank you very much for your time. And shall I say congratulations on this new venture, and we wish you well. I see the headlines are saying Mmusi Maimane back in politics. Did you ever leave?
Good evening, and good evening to fellow South Africans. I've always been a proud patriot of this country. I think I've always called on South Africans to find whatever way we can to serve. And so in answer to your question, do you leave? Sometimes politics has its own tainting to it. I think I'd rather always frame myself as someone who sought to fight for a South Africa that works for all, and politics has been one of the vehicles, and I'll continue to that fight, whether it doesn't matter where. But in this instance, this is the arena of politics, and this is the fight I'm engaged with.
Yeah, I know you engage on Twitter. You clap back now and again. You get into tours and all sorts of things. So you are well aware of the conversation, and many people are asking, so is this Mmusi Maimane 2.0? How different is this Mmusi from the Mmusi who was in the Democratic Alliance?
Look, I think, all of us grow up as people. As I said, even in the address yesterday, that I've known defeat. I've known what it's like to be tough, to face difficult moments. I've also known victory. I've seen how governments work and are put together in order to bring change. I've worked in the recent 3 years in communities that I previously were not able to gain access to. I've spent a lot of time in rural communities, and equally so, now coming back as a South African, saying to myself, a little wiser, a little stronger, a little bit more experienced, but a much more committed and resolute. So is it 2.0? I think it is always an improved version of oneself. We learn from our mistakes. and we develop our leadership. And so to me, I count it a privilege to be able to serve this country in this way. And I'm certainly looking forward to the journey. I think we've been battle hardened, as they say.
Yeah. There's a concern, and maybe you tell me what your thoughts are, and maybe it's a genuine concern, maybe it's not a bother for you, that black leaders are dissecting themselves way too much. And I'm sure you expected this, that as black leaders, you're all pushing your own personal interests. So each one of you is wanting to start your own party. And is this the best way to go about it? Or is there a different way in which you can consolidate your efforts together?
Yeah, I mean, it's precisely why I went out of my way to try and establish even a number of independents all across the country. And part of what we're doing is to bring them under one body so that that body can give voice to the diversity of talent. Because I think sometimes we only look at leadership that comes from politics and we ignore that there's business leadership. I think we ignore that there are people doing incredible things in civic society. And I want those people to be able to serve in parliament. But to the more political issue is that I do think we furthermore need to be able to say, what is the contestation of ideas that are coming through? Whilst I see what Mr. Malema is doing or what Mr. Mashaba is doing, I think they represent a different type of vision that we've got to bring forward. We've got to go back to the market and say to the people of South Africa, the alternatives are as such. And I really believe, given the vision for 2024, bringing a coalition government on the table, the success behind this issue will be to bring about the best so that we can build the best government we can in 2024. So I'm not worried so much about that. I'm more interested in making sure that, particularly for actors who have been outside the formalized political space and those who are committed, as we say, to building South Africa, let us work together and bring about that change. So I don't see the other leaders as competitors. We've got to go out and build this country, and that's what this needs. So I do think there'll be an opportunity in 2024 to be able to bring a coalition government.
Yeah. What makes you think that? I mean, others are saying even with an ANC going under 50% and maybe the EFF gaining some ground and the DA gaining or losing some ground, doesn't matter, you will never get to number one.
Well, a lot of people have got criticism, and I'm not worried about that. I'm focused on the job. I know that there's 5 and a bit million voters who are sitting out there, who are at home, who are saying we need a new alternative. And so the job is to work with those people. I believe I have a vision for this country that says to them, as I said, how do we ensure that the number one crisis in this country, which is the issue of unemployment, we can put a job in every home. So yes, as they say in the Twitter streets, haters will hate. My job now is to be resolute at making sure that we can give the best service to the people. Yeah. And so I'm putting up my hand, not out of a place of arrogance, but truly out of a place of saying, how can we serve the people? And ultimately, let's bring the best people to Parliament. That's the job.
We have arguably, depending on which side of the fence you're sitting, some good labor laws in the country. The laborers will tell you maybe they're not so great. They could be better. What are you bringing in terms of labor policy? As you're saying, one job for every household. What is it that you're bringing that is different to what we currently have in place?
I think currently, as we sit at the moment, there are certain restrictive conditions. I think the rights have been given too much to the unions. I think what we've got to do is figure out how do we give rights to employees? How do we make sure that citizens have got the right to exercise the best choice possible? And therefore, I also do think that whatever way you frame labor law, you've got to allow it to stimulate micro-enterprise. One of the unseen industries in this country is the GDP that occupies many of our townships. I always say, if I go to a funeral in the township, let alone the business that does the catering, the business that does the tents, the chairs, the undertakers, all of those businesses occupy the space as an ecosystem, and often they benefit from being unregulated. And so what we've now got to do is, rather than doing more, we've got to tighten up and strengthen what the rights of each of those employees that work within those companies are, so that it can't just be easy to just abuse in that system, but how do we get behind them in the best way possible? And one of the ways that I'm proposing is to introduce a much broader venture capital that says to the caterer, it's one thing for you to cater maybe at a funeral or at this place. How do we broaden that business so that it can compete with the other ones? South Africa's economy suffers because our lens of looking at lawmaking, etc., is driven by the few big companies that sit at the top, and we try and regulate them and ignore the fact that we've got a significant informal economy which thrives in some ways, but with more support, certainly support for individuals, support for capital, and support for the social network. I really think we could see the increase in the number of jobs that are created. And then lastly, I think that we need to consider quite deliberately what is the balance between urban policy in terms of where people work. I want to make sure that people are working closer to home, because at this point in time, many of the citizens in urban centers spend a significant proportion of their income traveling into places of work. They spend too much time away from their families and children. So you naturally end up with townships becoming only dormitories of unemployment. That's why I'm very strong on stimulating that economy so that people are working closer to home. In rural communities, I think we need to think about how best we can assist in sectors like the agricultural sector, manufacturing, and therefore in that instance it's about ensuring that we create zones where people can be able to invest bigger infrastructure than employ more people. Because at this point in time, when I spend time in places like Lepel and Kumbi and communities like Inokukijima, those municipalities, you walk around them and the municipality is often the sole employer, the sole provider of services, and businesses are suffering. Because not only is the infrastructure investment into those communities poor, but it's equally so that the job capacity is broken. I mean, you and I can cite examples of what happened with Clover, what happened with Sasco and many other businesses who are shut down because there's no infrastructure. We've got to reinvest in our rural economy if we're going to ensure that citizens in rural communities are not left to linger in poverty and are dependent simply on a grant system.
Let's take a break. We'll continue with leader of Build One South Africa, Mmusi Maimane, next here on In Focus with more of some of your thoughts, which I'm seeing coming through on Twitter. I'll put those to him and let's see if he is, of course, going to give you adequate answers to that. In Focus continues shortly. Welcome back, and thanks for staying on with us tonight here on In Focus. Conversation continues with Build One South Africa leader Mmusi Maimane. Launched his new party just the other day and already presenting a vision of one job for every household. What else does he have in the bag there? Now, one thing we know for sure is that in the country we've got a political party funding act in place. So sooner or later we'll know who's funding you. But maybe you want to tell us in advance who is funding you, because I know your former colleague at the Democratic Alliance, when he left Herman Mashaba to start his party, he said, starting a political party is expensive. I've had to break the bank and take some of the family's savings to be able to do this. We know now he is receiving support from all sorts of other places as well as putting his own money. Now, you've been in politics for a long time. I don't know if you've earned enough money to be able to start a political party, being a member of parliament. Who's getting behind you?
No, and I think that's always the thing. I really have been encouraged by how South Africans in different walks and different small amounts have come on board to say, let's help here. And so from this point on, within the next number of months, we'll be going on a fundraising drive. What we've got to try and eliminate, and this is where the thing is, what is called famously the golden rule. Who has the gold rules. Rather, what we've got to ensure is that we eliminate politics becoming an elite sport. We've got to stop it from just becoming a cost prohibitor and stopping leadership that's happening. And that's why I'm going across to say, even in a micro community, identify the best candidate. Let's support them to stand at national level so that your contributions go to actually making sure someone who is in your community can successfully stand for an election. So we are going to aggregate it across the country, and we're going to work with South Africans in various aspects to say, hey, let's make this dream a possibility. And I've been encouraged by how people have responded. Obviously, it's a long way, but I certainly could not be sitting on the sidelines saying, well, it's expensive, so let's all quit, while you and I are having this conversation smack in the middle of stage 4 load shedding or stage 5. I never quite know which stage we're in. All I know is that I'm doing this interview literally in the dark supported by batteries as much as most South Africans who are sitting in this country. So clearly, this country is not heading in the right direction. We have to ensure that we get in the ring at whatever cost it will take.
Mabule Rapela on Twitter saying the first challenge Mmusi Maimane needs to deal with is the perception that he defends undocumented migrants. This perception is not well addressed. It will hurt his electoral performance as people get upset with immigrants breaking laws and he only blames Home Affairs.
Yeah. No, I understand the difficulty that we faced with undocumented migrants, and yeah, in many instances, people want to take umbrage and say, let's fight them. But honestly, it's very difficult to fight undocumented migrants within the country, because the only converse solution is then to say everyone must then carry documents. And I think that was part of the apartheid system. What we've got to do is say, let's get back to our border control. Let's ensure that anyone who comes into this country comes in legally, has the appropriate documents. Let's build up capacity within the country so that anybody then is able to gain access to the documents. And if people are still continuing to act in illegality, then you can't tolerate that. But you can't just simply say, let's start internally. We have to get back to securing our borders and making sure that there's efficacy in how people come in. And I'm certainly committed to working with communities to take that stance. Another stance that simply says, let's just go out and let's allow the police to police people just internally by saying, which documents have you have? Police are not trained for that job. So let's not be populist at an issue here in this country. Let's rather focus on how effective we can manage borders and our immigration policy so that at the end of the day, citizens both within the country and outside the country have their rights protected.
Yeah. Already, I mean, I don't know whether it's the correct way of looking at it, but certainly people look at it that way. When you start a political party, first question that they ask, so who are you going to work with? Are you going to work with the ANC? Are you going to work with the DA? Are you going to work with the EFF? Have you asked yourself that question? Because suppose we're in the age of coalition governments.
Yeah, I think it's a fairly premature question to put on the table. I think what we've got to do is say, where is the vision? Who are the people who align with that vision? And let's get to the polls so that when we get on the other side of that, make sure that all the people who share our vision, who share our values, we can work together with. Trying to sit here today and pick between the DA and the ANC, I don't know where they'll either be come 2024. But all I know is that when we build a coalition, the principles that must guide those must be vision, values, and then we must give ourselves longer time to negotiate. Because one of the problems that we faced is that we are compelled to form a government within 14 days. And what often happens in that period is that you only negotiate for positions. You don't consult citizens on what needs to happen. And I'm saying let's actually work at making sure that that contract is binding, sustainable over a long period of time. Otherwise, you end up with chaotic coalitions if they're not managed properly. And the fear that many citizens have is what would happen if the ANC dips below 50. And I'm saying let us rather prepare ourselves adequately, take the time. So rather than picking a party, let's be articulate on the plan. And I think that the criticism that we're facing in the country, when people say it's a lack of consensus, alignment, or whatever, I simply put it to a lack of vision, and we've got to articulate that and coalesce around it. Then we can agree on what the way forward is.
Yeah. The question, of course, in South African politics is always around land. So is Build One South Africa pro-private property rights?
We're pro-justice. Citizens who have been left out, that's a value that we hold, right? Justice says that where citizens have been dispossessed of land, that land must be given back to them. That cannot be denied. We furthermore are of the principle of the fact that let citizens be able to own. Because, you see, Ubuntu says, how do I fulfill your humanity? And that's what I spoke at length about, that we are coalescent around values. And so let's identify key communities that can be able to say, here we are, we want to own this land, we want to have possession of this land. And it's a fundamental issue of justice, but it's a fundamental question of saying, how do we bring people back to Ubuntu Babu, their connectedness to the land with which they come from. So it's not just simplistically being kind of going private or whatever. It's about making sure that citizens can own in their right and be able to connect it to the land with which they reside in and they come from. So we will certainly be accelerating the idea of adjudication of title deeds. We'll certainly be accelerating the idea of people being able to custodians and ownership of land in that right. And I think that actually it's a strength of what our legislation does and our constitution, and over a long period of time, we'll be able to accelerate the process that rather than government owning the land in this particular instance, let more citizens be able to participate because they can connect with that land.
Yeah. I see one of the other questions that has come up is the question around your chairperson, Kuseli Jack, and whether or not he is dumping his Abantu integrity movement. What is happening? He's still keeping that? Because that's the ticket with which he has become the deputy mayor now in Gqeberha. What is happening with that particular status?
Well, you must remember that we built up a number of Section 15A organizations across the country who are becoming affiliates of One South Africa. Many of them have got councils that were elected. Now they've become affiliates of Build One South Africa. So they don't forego that membership. They become affiliates. And so Mkhuseli Jack, in the same way, the organization there is an affiliate of ours. We are working in partnership and will continue to serve as deputy mayor. But keep in mind that an organization that was established for the purpose of contesting a local government election is certainly will be focused on the 2024 national elections. And that's how the affiliates will work.
Right. One of the things, as you're saying, we're sitting in the dark, and you were launching there in Soweto just yesterday. And what I'm hearing, when those people are in the dark, the degree of crime that actually happens, they don't even have the luxury of having a generator, because apparently people will come knocking at their doors asking for that generator, or if they put a solar on top, it will be stolen in this process of being in the dark. That's a two-pronged question. The first one is, what is your plan to deal with crime? Are you for the devolution of powers? And then the second one is, what is your immediate roadmap towards dealing with the energy crisis?
Yeah. As I articulated earlier, our key bit is about decentralization, right? So I think the 1994 consensus of having a national SAPS has brought us to this point. But ultimately, there are a couple of key things that need to happen around safety. Let's bring the decentralization so we have a combination of Metro Police and SAPS so that they can execute the job of fighting crime. I also do think that the police suffer at this point in time from the perspective of prioritization. So for me, the priority is murder. We have to bring murder down. 67 people are being murdered every day in this country. So that's a challenge. We have to be able to build the ecosystem of crime. And part of the dilemma with that is that criminals are not scared anymore. They don't fear prosecution. They know that even if the police arrest them, that they'll never see the fulfillment of their sentence or actually the jail time. So what we've got to do is fix the criminal justice system so that if you do the crime, you'll do the time. And we've got to ensure that the fear is back with the criminals. So for me, I think decentralization, a partnership with local agencies, the identification of intelligence, and then ensuring that the participation, so that when citizens report a crime, we are clear about the fact that prosecution can take place. To the second question, which speaks to the energy crisis, I've laid out the fact that there's a 2, 5, and a 10-year plan around Eskom. On a 2-year place, we don't have a choice. We're in a crisis. We don't have energy at this point in time. Our capacity is now sitting at close to 60%, and thus, as a result of that, you are making choices in a fairly difficult situation. So whether we may disagree on the modalities of independent power production, I certainly think that it is the immediate and most direct step to go ahead. But it's going to start with having a leadership at Eskom and a board that has engineers that are able to deal with this issue. Secondly, I went to Stockholm in Sweden and engaged a number of companies around SMRs, which are micronuclear reactors that can be able to compensate for our grid. The production those off will take about 2 years, and we can ensure that we democratize access of energy, because energy is cheapest and consumed better closer to where it is. And then I think in the 5-year plan, we've got to diversify energy as best as we can by allowing other different types of technology to come place. I think there's an opportunity for hydro, as we're seeing in cities like Cape Town. There's an opportunity for gas and wind, and that must come in the 5-year energy mix that allows the fact that that not only do we deal with coal, nuclear, and the multiple other avenues, because we're seeing that in those technologies, it's becoming cheaper. I do think that our incorporation of our grid, that's over the 5 to 10 year period with the SADC region, allows us to also benefit from excess power energy that sits in other countries. So when countries have got things like gas in abundance, we can be able to benefit in partnership for that in a program. And so if we're able to execute against those with an appropriate leadership, dealing with the financial stability, empowering municipalities in reticulation and provision of energy, and then lastly, creating an online, if you like, energy exchange program where there can be wheeling of energy, which is a new technical process where there's actually a buying and a selling of energy so that we can contribute back to the grid. I strongly believe that within 2 years we can deal with load shedding for a long period of time, and certainly within 10 years we can provide stable, reliable energy and an opportunity for our GDP to grow in an appropriate way.
Yeah. Deputy Leader is a female. Is that setting the tone? Are you going to be doing meritocracy? Are you going to be doing quotas? How are you going to do it? Are you going to be stipulating 50% of the leadership has got to be female? How are you going to approach that?
It can be more than 50%. I think Nobuntu is an incredible individual. She's a businesswoman in her own right. She's written a number of books, and she certainly demonstrates the incredible leadership that I think this country can benefit from. It's the same as Muzuli Rakivane, who's the spokesperson, and it will be many others in the country that will come on board that are talented and are gifted. We want to make it possible for as many citizens to make it to the top as possible, but I'm very intentional at saying to ourselves that it's not, when you quotarize something, you make it seem as though there isn't an abundance of talent of females, so you have to almost create a special condition for them. We've got to ensure that as they ran an unbelievable women's commission that was able to identify some powerful leaders in all sectors of society, I actually think that the future is female. The future is one where women can be able to take more leadership roles. So if left up to me, at the risk of sounding populist, there should be more women in our leadership, and Build One South Africa will ensure that it's possible for that to happen.
Mmusi Maimane, pleasure as always. Thank you very much for coming on. Let's have you back in the studio sometime soon so we can take this conversation forward. But we thank you very much for your time tonight.
Look forward to it. Thank you very much.
That's a leader of Build One South Africa, Mmusi Maimane.